He left her for another woman, froze when she walked into the gala with his rival and their triplets. Before we dive into today's emotional story, tell me, where are you watching me from, and what's the time there right now? I'd love to know how far this story is traveling. Let's connect before the drama begins. The golden lights of Manhattan's Skyline Convention Hall shimmered over a sea of tailored suits, expensive colognes, and designer heels. Each person a lion in a corporate jungle, circling billion-dollar contracts like prey. Among them sat Logan Thatcher, 32, sharp-jawed and even sharper-minded, a man whose name sent waves across boardrooms and fear into competitors. With slicked-back black hair, cold blue eyes, and a reputation of never letting emotions interfere with profit, Logan had conquered industries the way emperors once conquered empires, without apology. Wealth was his religion, dominance his creed. But that night, something shifted in the air. As the speaker announced the next presentation, murmurs circled the room. Monroe Enterprises. Logan raised an eyebrow with curiosity, expecting another aging CEO with a predictable pitch. Instead, the spotlight revealed a vision that caused a ripple in his usually unshakable composure. Zaria Monroe stepped on stage, and time forgot how to move. Her mocha skin glowed beneath the chandelier light, her long dark braided hair cascading down her back like royalty in motion. Dressed in a sleek emerald-green power suit that hugged her curves and screamed elegance, she held a calm poise that demanded silence without asking for it. The room stilled, not out of politeness, but awe. She wasn't just beautiful, she was commanding. Her voice, when it came, was velvet and steel, smooth yet assertive, soft yet impossible to ignore. Her opening line wasn't flattery or statistics, it was challenge. We don't follow trends. We create the future. Logan leaned forward unconsciously, his fingers frozen around his whiskey glass. As Zaria unveiled the company's trajectory, market dominance, and future innovation on a massive LED screen behind her, Logan's analytical mind tried to remain focused, but his thoughts betrayed him. It wasn't just the numbers that mesmerized. It was the fearless way she moved through data as if conducting a symphony. Every sentence she spoke wrapped itself around his thoughts, pulling him deeper into her rhythm. Her confidence wasn't rehearsed. It was born of brilliance and battle. Around him, titans of industries watched with narrowed eyes, impressed but threatened. Logan, however, wasn't threatened. He was intrigued. Deeply. Unexpectedly. Intrigued in a way he hadn't felt in years. He watched her command the room that usually obeyed him, and instead of resentment, he felt admiration laced with something dangerous. Desire. Not the shallow lust he was used to from countless models and socialites, but a desire to unravel the layers beneath her composure. She didn't smile to charm. She smiled to conquer. Her eyes scanned the room with precision, landing on Logan for a brief moment. And in that single second, he felt exposed. As if she could see beyond his custom suit and fortune, into the emptiness he never admitted he carried. She resumed without missing a beat, flipping slides that forecasted growth curves and investment yields, but Logan no longer saw charts. He saw her future intertwining with his. He glanced at his assistant, who sat beside him, whispering, "Schedule a private meeting with her. I want that contract." But deep inside, he knew the contract wasn't what he truly wanted. The applause erupted as Zaria closed her presentation with a final quote that hung in the air like prophecy. "Power isn't inherited, it's built, brick by brilliant brick." The crowd rose to its feet, clapping thunderously. Logan remained seated, captivated, watching her walk off the stage like a queen retreating to her castle. His pulse had quickened, not from competition, but captivation. For the first time, he wasn't the most powerful person in the room, and somehow he didn't hate it. Zaria Monroe had awakened something in him, something dormant and dangerous, curiosity mixed with longing. She exited through the back curtain, unaware that she had just rewritten the course of his life. Logan, the untouchable titan, was touched, not by strategy or ambition, but by a woman who wasn't chasing him, didn't need him, and might just become the only thing he ever truly wanted. As the evening faded into background conversations and murmured deals, Logan stared at the empty stage, his heart echoing a question he couldn't shake. Who is she? And why do I feel like I've already lost if I don't find out? As the echo of applause faded and Zariah's silhouette disappeared behind the velvet curtain, Logan sat frozen in his chair. The roar of the gala nothing more than a distant hum now. Something inside him had shifted, quietly but irreversibly. By the time the night ended, he had already instructed his assistant to arrange a private contract meeting with Monroe Enterprises, but deep down, he knew it was not just about numbers anymore. It was about her. Within days, Zariah received the proposal, crisp and formal, unaware of the heartbeat that had pulsed through every word Logan had dictated. Their first meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city's skyline, where professionalism dressed their conversation, but glances betrayed growing tension. Zariah, always composed, dissected business strategy with the brilliance of a chess master, while Logan pretended to focus on profit margins when in reality he was memorizing the way she tilted her head when she spoke or how her lips curled ever so slightly when she proved a point. What began as formal collaboration soon evolved into something dangerously magnetic. Meeting after meeting, contract after contract, coffee turned into wine, and the lines between business and something deeper began to blur. He started timing his schedule around hers, finding excuses to call late at night about proposals that could have waited till morning. She, too, began noticing the warmth in his gaze, the softness in his tone reserved only for her, and the way silence between them no longer felt awkward, but charged. One night, after a particularly successful joint pitch, Logan looked at her as they stood outside her building under the stars and asked, without any of his usual arrogance, "Have dinner with me? No contracts, no spreadsheets, just you and me." Zariah hesitated, caught between her guarded heart and the quiet longing that had crept into her chest these past weeks. Eventually she nodded, and he smiled, not as a businessman sealing a deal, but as a man letting down walls. 2 nights later, he reserved the rooftop of one of the city's finest restaurants, lit with lanterns and scattered with rose petals, the skyline glittering like a crown beneath them. Logan wore a fitted black suit, nerves hidden behind charm, but inside he was pacing. When Zariah arrived, draped in a form-fitting black satin dress that shimmered like midnight silk, time slowed. Her hair was pinned back, revealing delicate earrings that glinted every time she moved. Logan rose from his seat, breath caught in his throat, and for a man who'd stood before presidents and kings, he'd never felt smaller or more human. They dined beneath string lights, with the soft murmur of jazz drifting in the background, and talked about everything but business, childhood memories, hidden scars, guilty pleasures, and the loneliness that came with building empires. She laughed at his sarcasm, and he listened like her voice held answers he never knew he needed. Halfway through dessert, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a single red rose, and placed it gently beside her hand. She looked up, puzzled, and he met her gaze, eyes stripped of every mask. "I love you, sweetheart," he said, voice quieter than usual, trembling with vulnerability. "I really love you." Zariah blinked, stunned, the words washing over her like a wave she hadn't braced for. She stared at him, her walls flickering, unsure if this was real or another polished move. But Logan's eyes held no performance, just a man willing to risk everything for something genuine. A long silence followed, her fingers brushing the petals of the rose. And then, slowly, she nodded, the corners of her lips turning upward. Not in surrender, but acceptance. "I wasn't expecting this," she whispered. "But I feel it too." Logan let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. From that moment, the air between them changed. He reached across the table, brushing her hand, and sparks danced between their fingertips like fire meeting gasoline. The night didn't end there. In the elevator ride down, their hands found each other naturally, like magnets reuniting after years apart. Words faded, replaced by glances and heartbeats. They didn't return to their separate penthouses. Instead, they checked into a hotel across the street, where desire melted into the night and passion tangled with whispered promises. In the privacy of that suite, Logan learned how love didn't need control, and Zariah discovered what it meant to be desired not for power, but presence. Their souls collided like stars, messy, wild, beautiful. From that night onward, they were no longer just business partners. They were something undefined but undeniable. They met now not just in boardrooms but in late-night drives, hidden cafes, art galleries where Logan watched her admire canvases like she saw more than colors, like she saw truth. Their connection deepened, not through grand declarations, but in the quiet moments, in the way he remembered her favorite coffee, in how she adjusted his tie before meetings without asking. He shared stories he'd never told anyone, of losing his mother to illness, of chasing success to silence, grief of never being enough in his father's eyes. She listened, not to fix him, but to hold the broken pieces without judgment. Zariah opened up about being the only woman of color in rooms full of men who doubted her intelligence, how she built her empire by bleeding behind closed doors, and how trust for her was a currency more valuable than gold. Logan didn't try to save her. He stood beside her. In the following weeks, they created a rhythm only they understood, where passion lived beside respect and power bowed before connection. But beneath the magic, destiny was already brewing its storm, quietly, mercilessly, from the moment that night wrapped around them like a silk ribbon and their souls intertwined in the warmth of that dimly lit suite. Logan and Zariah became something beyond title, beyond contract, beyond logic. They became gravity to one another. Days turned into stolen hours, boardroom glances into midnight embraces, and business meetings into longing escapes where only soft sheets and honest silence remained. They began to seek each other in the in-between moments, in the cracks of their empires, finding refuge in places where the world couldn't reach them. Logan, once a man built entirely from granite and ambition, began to feel unfamiliar things. Peace when her head rested on his chest, softness in the curve of her smile when she fell asleep before him, and a craving not just for her body, but for her presence, her opinion, her calm. She had become his storm's shelter, not by force, but by grace. They spent nights wrapped in crisp Egyptian cotton, surrounded by the scent of jasmine candles and echoes of laughter, where confessions were whispered between kisses and touch became their secret language. Sometimes they'd order room service and never touch the food, too caught up in each other's eyes to remember the world existed beyond that hotel floor. Zariah would read aloud from poetry books she kept tucked in her purse, and Logan, fascinated, would watch the words dance off her lips like music. There were nights she wore nothing but his shirt and walked barefoot across marble floors while sipping red wine and humming old jazz tunes, her hips swaying to rhythms older than pain. He memorized the way her fingers traced invisible circles on his chest when she lay beside him, the way her breath hitched just before she said something vulnerable, and how her eyes shimmered every time he called her mine. But what he didn't see, couldn't feel, was the life quietly forming inside her, a secret heartbeat growing stronger each day beneath her skin. Zariah had found out 2 weeks ago, alone in her townhouse bathroom, staring at the test with trembling hands and wide eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She smiled, because while it was unexpected, it was also magic, proof of a love that had bloomed in the shadows of 2 powerful lives. She wanted to tell him, wanted to watch his reaction, to feel his arms around her with joy instead of fear. But the timing never felt right. So she kept it folded in her heart like a love letter waiting for the perfect page. And in the meantime, she cherished every moment they had together. She took extra care in how she carried herself, wrapped her hands protectively around her stomach when alone, whispered lullabies under her breath when Logan wasn't looking. At night, while he slept with one arm thrown across her waist and his face buried in the crook of her neck, she stared at the ceiling, wondering what kind of father he'd be. Would he trade stocks and diapers in the same breath? Would he spoil their child or teach them grit? She pictured him holding a baby against his chest, suit wrinkled and heart wide open. The image made her smile, even if a small ache tugged at the corners of her heart, because the deeper her love grew, the louder the fear crept in. Logan was changing, yes, booze. But parts of him still clung to the edges of control, still flinched at words like vulnerability and permanence. She knew him enough to see the walls he hadn't even noticed were still standing. So she waited. Let the baby grow quietly, loved and unseen. She continued their secret getaways, wrapped herself in his kisses, let the world blur whenever he looked at her like she was the only thing that made sense in his empire of chaos. Their hotel nights became rituals. She would light a candle, he would dim the lights, they would undress each other slowly, like every layer revealed more than skin. She'd whisper, "Don't disappear on me," and he'd reply, "Only if you promise to stay." They shared playlists. They talked about what they'd do if they weren't CEOs. She confessed she once dreamed of being a dancer, and he admitted he hated his father's legacy, but didn't know who he was without it. She kissed the parts of him that were never kissed before, not just flesh, but wounds. And he loved her like a man who had never been loved right. He bought her a necklace engraved with, "For the one thing I never knew I needed," and she wore it close to her heart, like armor. Yet behind every tender moment, the secret kicked gently inside her, a quiet reminder that their love story was about to grow branches they hadn't planned for. One night, as they lay side by side watching city lights flicker through the windows, Zariah turned to him, her fingers tracing patterns on his arm, and almost told him. Her lips parted, the words hovered. But then Logan turned to her and said, "Promise me nothing changes, that this thing between us stays just like it is right now." And just like that, the moment passed. She nodded, smiled, and whispered, "I promise," while a tear slipped silently across her cheek, because change was already blooming inside her, and soon the nights that brought them closer would no longer be just theirs. They were already three, though he didn't know it yet. And as the city slept around them and love burned low and slow in their hotel suite, Zariah held both joy and fear in her heart, praying that when truth finally found its moment, Logan's love wouldn't vanish with it. 3 months after their whirlwind of passion and business synergy, Logan Thatcher and Zariah Monroe exchanged vows in a breathtaking, ultra-private yet extravagantly luxurious ceremony tucked away in the rolling hills of Napa Valley, where security drones buzzed quietly above and white orchids rained from the sky like blessings from the gods. Celebrities, industry titans, and global media couldn't get a glimpse, but they speculated endlessly, calling them the Empire Couple in bold headlines across financial tabloids. Zariah, radiant in a shimmering diamond-embedded silk gown tailored in Paris, walked down a candlelit aisle with grace and poise, but behind her glowing brown eyes shimmered a truth only she knew. Inside her, a delicate life was growing, one she hadn't told Logan about yet, one she wanted to unveil like a precious gift when the time felt divine. Logan, clad in a custom Italian tuxedo, couldn't take his eyes off her as she floated toward him, her smile whispering power, elegance, and mystery all at once. And though he had never believed in fairy tales, something about that moment stirred the boy he had buried beneath decades of ruthless ambition. The vows were simple but piercing. He promised loyalty, partnership, and to build an empire side by side, while Zariah, voice trembling slightly, promised to stand beside him not just in wealth and glory, but in soul and silence. The crowd erupted in applause as they kissed beneath a crystal archway, cameras clicking from a safe distance as fireworks painted the sky with their initials in gold. As night descended, the reception sparkled under vintage chandeliers and velvet drapes, jazz humming softly while the elite mingled and danced. But Logan's hand never left hers. He was captivated, almost possessively drawn to her calm command. They cut a 7-tier cake wrapped in edible silver, fed each other bites between soft laughter, and whispered secrets no one else would ever hear. But Zariah, though smiling brightly, felt her heart race differently now, not just from love or success, but from the life fluttering within her womb like a tiny drumbeat of hope. She glanced at him often that night, wondering if he'd be ready, if he'd melt or harden at the news, and whether his love could stretch beyond wealth and legacy into something pure, something real. As they danced their first waltz as husband and wife under a halo of champagne mist, Logan leaned in and whispered, "You're the greatest acquisition of my life." And though the crowd cheered, a soft ache flickered in Zariah's chest, because love was never meant to be bought, and she wondered if he'd love the baby not as an heir, but as a soul. They left the Gala in a white Rolls-Royce Phantom, stars blinking above like silent witnesses to fate, and drove into the night toward a secluded estate he had purchased for her, a mansion by the sea that roared like a lullaby. As he carried her across the threshold, laughing and spinning her like a scene from a movie, Zariah looked into his eyes, searching for softness that might welcome the secret inside her. They made love beneath silk sheets and moonlight, and afterward, as he slept with arms possessively wrapped around her waist, Zariah stared at the ceiling, one hand gently resting on her stomach, wondering if her news would deepen their bond or shatter it. The waves crashed outside like an omen, not of disaster, but of change. And as morning sunlight bled through velvet curtains, she kissed his cheek and whispered, "Soon, my love, soon you'll know." Yet deep in her heart, a strange unease flickered, because nothing in Logan's world stayed perfect for long, and love in the empire of power was a fragile crown. As the glow of their secret grew brighter within Zariah's womb, she walked through each day with quiet joy, unaware that a storm was brewing just beyond her horizon. While she carefully arranged dinner nights, checked his favorite wine, and softly hummed lullabies no one else could hear, Logan was slowly slipping into a dangerous web spun not by fate, but by Ariana Vale, a name that echoed like silk and venom. Ariana had walked into Thatcher Enterprises with stilettos that punctured silence and a contract portfolio that gleamed with billion-dollar promises, her sharp red lips curving like they already owned the room. Logan, though still wearing the warmth of Zariah's love, felt a tremor the moment he shook Ariana's hand. An unspoken current surged between them, forbidden and reckless. At first, he brushed it off as adrenaline from high-stakes investment talk, but her voice lingered like perfume on his skin, her eyes burned into him during board meetings, her laughter wound its way around his restraint, like ivy through concrete. Late evenings at the office became frequent. Logan told himself it was business, but deep down, a fracture was forming in the fortress Zariah had softened. One night, with the moon casting silver shadows through the office blinds, Ariana leaned in over spreadsheets and billion-dollar graphs, her perfume laced with something wicked, her breath close enough to ignite paper. Logan pulled back, muttering something about being married, about boundaries, but she smiled like a secret and pressed her lips against his before he could finish the sentence. It was fire, raw, unexpected, and completely wrong. He didn't push her away, not fast enough, not firm enough, and when their lips parted, it wasn't guilt that hit first, it was hunger. He stumbled back, but she only stepped closer, whispering words dipped. In temptation, telling him no one had to know, that it meant nothing, that power sometimes demanded pleasure. Logan hesitated, caught between love and lust, between vows and ego, between Zariah's soft heartbeat and Ariana's thunderous seduction, and he failed. They crashed into his office couch like strangers meeting in sin, clothes undone by urgency, silence torn by betrayal yet to be known. Afterward, Logan sat shirtless, elbows on knees, running a shaking hand through his hair while Ariana reapplied her lipstick without a shred of shame, and told him it wouldn't hurt anyone unless he let it. Guilt wrapped around his throat, but Ariana's laughter echoed like applause in a theater of lies. The next morning, Logan kissed Zariah on the forehead before leaving for work, watching her sleep peacefully with one hand over her stomach, unaware that the man she loved had already cracked their foundation. Zariah, radiant and devoted, made his favorite breakfast and slipped a note into his jacket pocket. "Can't wait to share our heartbeat with you soon." Logan read it alone in the elevator and nearly broke down, but pride kept his lips sealed. He didn't confess, not even when Zariah greeted him at home with the soft glow of scented candles and plans to visit a baby boutique over the weekend. He nodded and smiled, pretending everything was perfect, while shame coiled inside him like a serpent, biting deeper every time she said, "I love you." Ariana, meanwhile, didn't stop. She texted him bold selfies and late-night messages, reminding him of what they shared, playing on his weakness like a puppeteer yanking strings. Logan started showing up late, dodging Zariah's warm gaze, taking longer showers, and making excuses about board meetings that never happened. And yet Zariah remained his calm, his grace, the gentle melody in his chaos. Her laughter still made him pause, her touch still made him want to believe he was a good man. But the weight of his betrayal was growing heavier by the hour. Zariah, trusting blindly, even called Ariana one day to thank her for her investment, saying she was excited to work alongside such a powerful woman. Ariana's smirk on the other end of the line was sharp enough to draw blood. Logan overheard it and nearly collapsed with guilt, but said nothing, a coward imprisoned by his own choices. Zariah lit candles at night and prayed for their child, prayed for a happy future, while Logan sat beside her in silence, haunted by a secret that refused to sleep. The mornings that once began with Zariah's soft kisses and her humming while making coffee turned cold and silent as Logan began disappearing more often, claiming back-to-back investor meetings, while in truth his nights were being stolen by Ariana's seductive smile and her intoxicating touch behind hotel curtains. Each encounter with Ariana blurred the lines between desire and disaster, but Logan, driven by ego and lust, ignored the guilt clawing at the back of his mind. Meanwhile, Zariah, glowing with quiet joy and the life growing inside her, planned a surprise announcement, unaware that the man she loved was slipping into the arms of another. Ariana, always calculating, never lost sight of her endgame, and one evening, as Logan buttoned his shirt in a haze of post-regret, she leaned in with a devilish whisper, "I'm pregnant with your child." The words hit him like a storm crashing through stained glass windows, shocking, sharp, and shattering. He froze, staring at her in disbelief, trying to process the consequences of a single night's weakness. But Ariana didn't wait for his panic to settle. She slid a folder across the hotel table, filled with pictures, emails, and a signed paternity claim, her tone cold and clear. "Divorce Zariah. Marry me. Or everything you built, your empire, your reputation. It goes up in flames." Logan's hands trembled as he opened the file, his pulse racing as he realized Ariana had been documenting everything, their meetups, their calls, even photos of him entering and exiting hotels. She hadn't fallen for him. She had baited him. Pride wounded and judgment clouded, Logan couldn't think straight. Instead of confessing to Zariah and facing the storm together, he chose the coward's path. In a sterile law office with glass walls and heartless pens, he signed the divorce papers without leaving her a single word of explanation. Zariah received the envelope on a rainy Tuesday, her smile fading into confusion, then cracking into a sob so deep it shook her soul. Her hands trembled as she opened the papers, not understanding why the man who once held her belly and whispered dreams into her skin now wanted her gone. No reason, no meeting, no goodbye. Just ink on paper, and silence in between. Meanwhile, Logan sat in his office, staring out at the skyline, convincing himself he was protecting her by cutting her off, while every heartbeat screamed her name. Zariah stayed up that night on the floor of their once-shared bedroom, clutching a pillow that still smelled like him, whispering to the child in her womb, "I don't know what happened, baby, but I promise I'll never leave you." The headlines the next week were brutal. Speculations of scandal, rumors of infidelity. Paparazzi shots of Logan with Ariana walking into a private hotel, hand in hand. Zariah turned off the TV, held her stomach, and cried. Logan, now trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, found himself drowning in regret, but his pride wouldn't let him reach out. Ariana moved into his penthouse, redecorated everything, erased Zariah's presence like she'd never existed, and yet Logan couldn't sleep in that bed. Every corner of his heart still throbbed with Zariah's memory, her laughter echoing in EMP. Thai room, her warmth haunting cold sheets. He smiled for the cameras, posed beside Ariana at charity galas, but behind the smiles, his soul withered. Meanwhile, Zariah packed her bags, wiped her tears, and made a vow. If he didn't want to be part of this child's life, then she would be both mother and father. She started working quietly, rebuilding her company stronger than before, with the fire of betrayal burning beneath her success. And while Logan celebrated Ariana's public pregnancy announcement, he never realized the truth he'd abandoned was quietly growing. Zariah's secret, not one, not two, but 3 lives. Triplets. Destiny, however, wasn't done. The day would come when everything he traded for lust would pale in comparison to what he lost in love. As Zariah sat alone on the edge of their once-shared silk-sheeted bed, clutching the cruel envelope that had shattered her world, her vision blurred with hot, relentless tears. Each drop a betrayal, each signature on the divorce paper a dagger straight through the dreams she had once dared to believe in. Her hands trembled, pressing against her still flat belly where new life fluttered unknowingly, and she gasped in disbelief, pain spiraling through her chest like wildfire. How could Logan, her husband, her partner, her once sweet whisperer of forever, turn cold without a single explanation, no warning, no fight, just silence and a final stab to the heart? Alone in the cavernous luxury apartment they once danced in under moonlight, Zariah dragged a small suitcase with shaking hands, her heart weighing more than her belongings. Manhattan's sharp winter wind didn't compare to the icy void inside her soul as she walked aimlessly beneath city lights that once reflected promise, now mocking her loss. Strangers bustled past, indifferent to the woman falling apart at their elbows, a woman whose womb carried his legacy, a woman discarded, like a business deal gone wrong. Her heels clicked louder, faster, her breath ragged, every step a silent scream toward nowhere, until her legs carried her to the edge of a lonely bridge overlooking a dark river that seemed to welcome her brokenness with open arms. With tears streaming down her face, she whispered apologies to the life inside her, her heart splitting between motherly instinct and devastating despair, unsure whether she was protecting her child from a cold world or surrendering to it. Just as her feet moved one final inch toward the ledge, a black limo's tires screeched against the asphalt, lights flooding her in a blinding halo of unexpected salvation. The back door flung open, and from the shadows emerged a tall figure in an expensive coat, his voice deep but steady. "Don't." That one word froze her breath, her tears, her next step. Emery Steele, calm, enigmatic, a man she'd seen once in a boardroom and never forgotten, reached out a hand with an urgency so raw, so real, her knees buckled. "Zariah Monroe," he murmured, recognizing her despite the night's shadows. "You don't belong at the edge. You belong at the top." Trembling, she allowed herself to be pulled into the warmth of the vehicle, the smell of leather and quiet luxury wrapping around her like safety she hadn't known in months. Inside the limo, Emery didn't bombard her with questions or pity. He simply poured her water, covered her shivering shoulders, and let silence speak of compassion. Zariah sat there sobbing softly, her hand protectively over her belly, realizing someone had seen her pain, truly seen it, not for headlines or gossip, but for the raw storm inside her. When Emery finally spoke, it wasn't with romantic charm or rehearsed sympathy, it was with reverence. "I saw your presentation last year. I saw a queen on that stage, and now she's crumbling." Zariah looked at him with swollen eyes, a flicker of defiance battling the heartbreak. "He left me," she whispered, "without a word. I'm pregnant. I don't even know how to keep breathing." Emery nodded solemnly, his gaze steady. "Then let me remind you who you are." And over the next few days, he didn't just offer her shelter, he gave her space, time, and quiet strength. He introduced her to therapists, midwives, and warm home-cooked meals. She watched snow fall from the penthouse window of his estate, hands on her belly, wondering if this calm after the storm, was mercy, or just a pause before more pain. But every day, Emery showed up, not with declarations of love, but gestures of presence. He read reports beside her, let her sleep through her breakdowns, and never once crossed a line. And slowly, something in Zariah began to shift. Not healed, not whole, but held. Her stomach rounded beautifully, and her eyes, though still stormy, found slivers of peace. She still cried at night sometimes, still heard Logan's voice in dreams, still clutched old wedding photos. But now there was someone holding her hand in the darkness, not to replace Logan, but to remind her that light still existed. She began sketching designs again, writing business ideas and speaking softly to her baby. Emery watched from a respectful distance, offering partnership, not possession. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the winter haze, Zariah stood on Emery's balcony, stronger, calmer, and whispered to the wind, "You thought you could break me, Logan, but you only made me rise." And inside her, 3 tiny heartbeats echoed her vow. Emery's hand was warm yet firm as it gripped Zariah's trembling fingers. His eyes, calm pools of strength, never once breaking contact with her swollen, tear-blurred ones as he said softly, "Let me help you stand again." Zariah, still shattered from Logan's betrayal, felt a strange peace wash over her as the limo door shut, muffling the cruel sounds of a world that had turned its back on her. Inside the sleek luxury of Emery's world, silence wasn't cold. It was comforting. And as the wheels rolled away from the bridge, it was as if destiny had changed lanes. That night, she barely spoke, curled on the leather seat with her arms around her belly, feeling the tiny kicks of life that reminded her she couldn't give up. Emery didn't push for answers. He simply sat beside her, with the calm stillness of someone who understood that healing sometimes began in silence. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with questions. It was with truths. "You are not broken, Zariah. You are just too powerful for the wrong man." Those words shattered something inside her, not from pain, but from relief, because someone finally saw her, not as a victim, not as a burden, but as a woman wronged, yet still full of power. Days turned into weeks in Emery's estate, modern, vast, but strangely intimate. He gave her space to breathe, but always made sure she was never alone. When she awoke from nightmares, he was there with warm tea. When her mood swung with hormones, he listened without judgment. When she cried in the garden under the moonlight, he simply handed her a blanket and sat nearby, asking nothing. Slowly, Zariah began to bloom again. Her confidence, once crushed beneath the weight of betrayal, returned in flickers, like sunrise after a long night. One evening, as they walked beneath cherry blossoms blooming wildly around the estate, she asked why he'd helped her. Emery looked ahead and said, "Because you reminded me of my mother. Strong, smart, abandoned by the wrong man, but never defeated." And that was the moment her walls cracked. Not because he offered her rescue, but because he offered her respect. As the weeks turned into months, Emery didn't just offer support, he offered partnership. When he took her hand one night over dinner and asked her to be his wife, it wasn't rushed. It felt like home. He didn't kneel. He didn't bring a ring. He simply said, "I want to give your babies my name, and you my forever." With trembling lips and eyes full of unshed tears, Zariah said yes, not out of desperation, but out of newfound strength. They married quietly in the garden where she'd once sat crying. It was a simple ceremony. No flashing lights, no media, no fake smiles, just 2 hearts promising to protect each other. Months later, in a private hospital room filled with soft music and the scent of fresh roses, Zariah screamed through labor. Emery never left her side, holding her hand, whispering, "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." When the first baby arrived, a boy with eyes the color of the man who broke her, Zariah gasped. Then came the second, another boy, same blue eyes, same curls. And then the third, a little girl with her nose, her cheeks, and those unmistakable icy blue eyes that mirrored Logan's soul. But when Emery held them all in his arms, he didn't flinch. He kissed their foreheads, smiled at Zariah, and said, "They're mine now, in every way that counts." Zariah wept, not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude, because she realized that love wasn't always loud or poetic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and patient enough to wait beside you until you remembered who you were. As she lay in bed that night, her babies sleeping beside her, and Emery reading a book in the corner, Zariah knew her story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time she held the pen, Her fall had been brutal, but her rise, oh, it was going to be legendary. Logan stood at the altar with Ariana, cameras flashing, press cheering, and an emptiness eating him alive, but he pushed it all down, convincing himself this was the price of empire. In the beginning, she was a vision of elegance, draped in luxury, armed with charm, but behind closed doors, her mask cracked. Ariana became ice in a silk dress, a storm wrapped in diamonds, and every kiss tasted like poison dipped in honey. "You were easy," she whispered one night, swirling wine in a crystal glass. "So easy to break." Logan laughed at first, thinking it was flirtation, until she repeated it again and again, until the words carved themselves into his psyche. She withheld affection, mocked Zaraya's name like it was dirt, and grew obsessed with control, replacing love with power plays. Each morning, Logan woke up next to her and felt further from the man he once was. She would scroll through his phone, demand account passwords, and schedule boardroom meetings without his knowledge, undermining his authority with a smile. One night, she threw a champagne glass across their penthouse suite, screaming, "You're nothing without me!" And the worst part? He started to believe her. He noticed how she flaunted his last name like a badge of victory, not love. She rebranded his companies in her image, cut off his oldest allies, and isolated him from friends who dared speak Zaraya's name. Logan would sit alone in his office, surrounded by opulence, yet crushed under the weight of hollow victories. His nights with Ariana were transactional, dripping in lust, but stripped of warmth. And just when his heart whispered that something was off, the truth crashed down. There was no baby, no heartbeat, no life growing in her. Just a lie wrapped in a red lace dress. She had forged ultrasounds, bribed doctors, faked morning sickness, and manipulated his guilt until he was too entangled to see straight. Logan confronted her, shaking with disbelief, but Ariana laughed, tossing the fake test results at his chest. "There never was a child. You were the child, fooled, owned, and discarded." His knees buckled beneath the weight of her betrayal. He staggered into his private study, gripping the edge of his desk, haunted by the memory of Zaraya's tears, her warm embrace, the baby she'd wanted to surprise him with, the soft glow in her eyes. He remembered the divorce papers, how he never let her speak, how he signed them like a coward. Now the silence was his penance. Ariana paraded through his home, entertaining her lovers, hosting lavish parties with his money, while he sat alone in dark corners, drowning in regret. The media, once praising their union, now whispered about his faded smile and hollow eyes. Investors grew wary, stocks dipped, rumors spread. Logan spiraled, drinking more, sleeping less, staring at old photos of Zaraya and wondering how he traded heaven for a storm. One night, he collapsed in the shower, clutching his chest, whispering her name through choked sobs. He realized he hadn't just lost her, he had destroyed her. He saw himself clearly now, not as a man who made a mistake, but as the architect of his own ruin. His empire glittered, but his soul was cracked. Ariana, now crueler than ever, reminded him daily, "You signed everything to me. Your world is mine now." He tried to undo it, to reverse the signatures, to reclaim what was once his, but the contracts were airtight, and Ariana had made sure of it. Her pregnancy lie was just the bait, the trap was his own pride. He missed the smell of Zaraya's cocoa butter, the softness in her voice when she'd say, "I believe in you," even when he didn't deserve it. He remembered her hand on his chest at night, her laugh when they danced barefoot in the kitchen, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at him, not at his money. Now, all he had was cold sheets and a colder heart. He started avoiding mirrors, unable to face the man he'd become. The truth clawed at him. Zaraya was the queen, and he had traded her for a crown of thorns. But what haunted him most wasn't the lies or the loss. It was the memory of her walking away, belly full with life, tears cascading like rivers of grief, and him standing there, silent, stupid, spineless. Logan sat in the darkness of his penthouse that night, the city below alive with noise, but his world deafeningly quiet. He reached for his phone, scrolled through old photos and stopped on one where Zariah was laughing, pregnant glow unmistakable, eyes bright, heart unbroken. And for the first time in months, he wept not because he lost her, but because he destroyed the only woman who truly loved him. Logan sat in his corner office, staring blankly at the skyline, drowning in the silent consequences of his choices when his assistant cautiously stepped in, placing a gilded envelope on his desk. It was an invitation to the global Gala of industry leaders, an annual gathering of powerhouses and legacy makers. He hadn't attended in years, not since his fall from grace, not since Ariana drained his accounts and soul alike, leaving him with nothing but a reputation barely clinging to relevance. He almost dismissed the invitation until a name on the guest list caught his eye: Emery Steele. The name buzzed through every corridor of elite business networks, a billionaire mogul, known for both his silent power and the mysterious wife who never gave interviews, never showed her face in public, but whose beauty and presence were said to silence rooms. Logan's hand trembled slightly. Over the past few years he'd ignored the murmurs, the mentions in boardrooms, whispers at charity events, rumors of a woman with warm brown skin, regal poise, and a heart-melting smile who attended with 3 children, each with piercing blue eyes that haunted him in dreams. He'd laughed them off, convinced it was coincidence, a cruel trick of the universe. But now, the dots began connecting like lightning across his memory. He had seen those eyes before, and they weren't Emery Steele's. Obsession cracked through denial. He instructed his assistant to clear his schedule and arrange a custom suit. As the gala approached, Logan found himself plagued by nightmares. Zariah's tears as she begged for an explanation, her hands on her belly, the look in her eyes the day she disappeared. What had he done? At the gala, crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light, while orchestras played soft jazz, and the world's elite sipped champagne and exchanged deals sealed with pride. Logan stepped in, jaw clenched, shoulders tight, but his bravado faded the moment his gaze landed on her. Across the room, surrounded by grace and power, stood Zariah, no longer the woman he discarded but a vision of glory, wrapped in an emerald gown that shimmered with every movement, holding the hands of 3 striking children whose features mirrored his own. His breath caught, the room blurred, his knees almost buckled. Zariah didn't flinch when she saw him. Instead, her eyes, strong, calm, unyielding, met his like a queen acknowledging a ghost. Emery Steele stood beside her, tall, protective, with a gaze that sliced through Logan without a word. A lifetime of regret flooded Logan in seconds. The kiss that began his downfall, the lies he chose over love, the unborn children he abandoned without ever knowing them. He wanted to run to her, fall at her feet, scream apologies, but his feet refused to move. She turned slightly, spoke to one of the triplets, a boy whose jawline was identical to his, and smiled with such warmth that Logan felt his soul fracture. He was not looking at the broken Zariah he left behind. He was witnessing a woman reborn in fire, who had risen higher than he'd ever dreamed. Logan clutched his chest as if to hold back the scream forming deep within, while applause erupted in the room. Emery and Zariah were being honored for their joint humanitarian initiative, an award he, Logan, had once arrogantly believed would bear his own name. As the crowd celebrated her, Logan backed into a shadowed corner, invisible now in a world where he once ruled. His mind played cruel loops, Zariah feeding the triplets, Emery kissing her temple, the kids laughing as they called Emery Dad. Tears burned behind his eyes. This was no rumor. This was his reality, his reckoning, his loss, carved into perfection. And as he stood there in silence, watching the woman he thought he broke now shine brighter than ever, Logan realized he hadn't just lost a wife, he'd lost a legacy. Logan stood beneath the shimmering chandeliers of the Grand Eternia ballroom, swirling a glass of champagne in his hand, feigning interest in hollow conversations and distant laughter, until the atmosphere shifted like a sudden gust of fate had swept through the room. Then silence swallowed the gala whole. His gaze followed the stunned stares of the elite as the grand doors opened, and there she was, Zariah. She moved with grace that defied gravity, her red gown flowing like fire, dancing with dignity, her chin high, her eyes calm, storms of pain mastered and triumph earned. Her braided hair, adorned with subtle gold beads, gleamed under the soft lights, but it was the three children beside her, 2 boys and a girl, each with striking blue eyes that cut deeper than any blade. And then came Emery Steele, his powerful stride, the quiet authority in his presence, his hand gently placed on the small of Zariah's back, a gesture not of possession, but of reverence. Logan's world tilted, his chest constricted. Breathing became a chore, the lies he told himself cracked. As applause erupted around them for Emery's arrival, Zariah's beauty outshone the flashes of cameras. The children smiled, their innocent laughter echoing around Logan like judgment passed from heaven. One of the boys tugged playfully at Emery's tuxedo, and Logan noticed the way Emery stooped down, kissed the child's forehead, and whispered something that made the girl giggle. Every fiber of Logan's being shattered quietly. He clutched his champagne glass tighter until it trembled. Ariana, draped in silver and suffocating bitterness, hissed beside him, "You're pale. What's wrong?" He said nothing. Words had become foreign. That woman, the woman he left broken and pregnant, had become the queen of the night. And those children, his. He saw his nose on the little boy's face, his jawline etched into the girl's growing beauty, the unmistakable mirror of his genes in their eyes. But they didn't know him. They didn't run to him. They didn't even glance his way. Zariah's gaze finally landed on him. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't pain. It was something far worse, indifference laced with power. She looked at him like he was just another man in a crowded room. She didn't blink. Emery leaned in and whispered something to her. She smiled softly, placing a hand on his chest. That simple act burned Logan alive. He watched Emery pull out a chair for her at the head table, watched the children climb into their seats with practiced elegance. The way they moved, poised and well-raised, revealed the years of love and nurturing he had forfeited. He had traded all of this, for what? For lust wrapped in lies. For a woman who now resented him, who drained him daily with venom disguised as love. Regret surged like poison in his veins. Memories of Zariah, pregnant, crying, begging for answers, replayed like cruel ghosts mocking him. The lights dimmed for the host's speech, but Logan saw only her. Zariah, his ex-wife, his only truth. A violinist began to play, and Zariah rose for the honorary toast. She stood, radiant and unshaken, lifting her glass, her voice calm yet commanding. To love that heals, to strength that never breaks, and to family that chooses you. The words weren't aimed at him, but they pierced him deeper than if they were. The crowd clapped. Logan sat paralyzed. As she sipped her champagne and kissed her daughter's cheek, Logan blinked rapidly to push back the tears stinging his eyes. For a moment, Zariah looked his way once more, not to wound, not to acknowledge, but to remind him of everything he lost the day he chose pride over truth. The gala buzzed back to life, but Logan remained frozen, haunted in plain sight, a man surrounded by luxury, yet impoverished by his own decisions. The night roared on, but for him, it had ended the moment she walked in, because a ghost from his past had become the queen of his regrets. Logan's legs move before his mind can catch up, every step towards Zariah like dragging chains of regret behit, and him, the world around him disappearing into a blur of murmurs and chandelier light as the only thing in focus becomes her, the woman he betrayed, standing tall like a queen reborn, her crimson gown flowing like liquid fire, her posture regal, her eyes unwavering as they pierce through him with a calm fierceness he's never seen before. The children, standing close behind her, look up at him with faces that echo his, those striking blue eyes, the shape of their jawlines, the subtle arch of their brows. His children, undeniably, and yet wholly foreign to him. He stops inches away, his voice cracking like dry earth under storm. "They're mine!" And the way the question trembles in the air is almost painful, like a confession he never had the courage to make when it mattered. But Zariah doesn't flinch. She doesn't smile. She simply holds his gaze with all the power of a woman who has risen from ash and fire, and her words slice through the crowd like a judge's verdict. They were. Now, they belong to a man who didn't need to own me to love me. And in that moment, the silence is deafening, only broken by a collective gasp as the truth detonates in the ballroom like an emotional explosion. Logan's knees buckle internally as the weight of every selfish choice crashes into his chest, his pride, his fear, his weakness. All the things that made him sign those divorce papers without a word, all the nights he justified Ariana's manipulation for the sake of image, all the mornings he told himself Zariah would be fine without him, now unraveling into a tapestry of public shame and silent longing. Emery steps forward, one hand gently placed on Zariah's lower back with a protective grace that screams devotion without saying a word, and the children naturally drift closer to him like planets to a sun, their small hands brushing against his tucks as if it's the only place they've ever felt see. Off. Logan watches, breathless, as his own blood finds comfort in another man's warmth, in another man's world, and it shatters him in ways that have no words, only silent storms behind. Tear-glazed eyes. Zariah doesn't mock him, she doesn't belittle him, and somehow that hurts more, because she's not here for revenge, she's not here to flaunt her victory. She's simply here to exist as the woman he never truly saw, the mother he abandoned, the wife he discarded when her worth no longer fed his ego. "I didn't know," he chokes out, his voice barely above a whisper, thick with regret. But Zariah's eyes don't soften. Instead, they remain steady, as if saying knowing wouldn't have changed what you chose. The cameras catch every flicker of pain on Logan's face, every tightening of his jaw, every twitch in his brow as the consequences of his betrayal play out before the world like a public sentencing. And still, Zariah remains poised, not as a scorned ex-wife, but as a woman who rebuilt herself piece by piece without bitterness, who now stands beside a man who didn't steal her light, but helped her shine brighter. The music resumes in the background, low and melancholic, as Logan slowly backs away, swallowed by a sea of curious onlookers and silent judgment, each step away from Zariah like tearing a scab off a wound he never let heal. She turns her back to him without a word, not in cruelty, but in closure, her hand reaching for Emery's as they move toward their seats, her children skipping lightly ahead, unaware of the storm that just passed, or perhaps too loved to care. Logan stands alone in the middle of opulence and success, surrounded by power yet stripped of everything that ever truly mattered, his heart echoing with a single searing truth. He gave up a queen and lost a legacy he never deserved. Logan stood outside the towering gates of the steel mansion, his hands trembling as he clutched a letter he'd rewritten a dozen times but never sent. Words that once sounded like apologies now felt like whispers in a storm too loud to tame. Each step on the path felt heavier than the last, as if guilt had weight and time refused to forget. Emery had agreed to meet him, not out of pity but for the sake of the children, whose blue eyes haunted Logan's dreams like unanswered questions. When the doors opened, Logan was greeted not by warmth, but by silence so cold it pierced deeper than anger. Zariah stood tall in the hallway, her figure regal and calm, dressed in silk and strength. Her eyes locked on his, not with hatred, but with a distant dignity he no longer deserved. "This is not a second chance for us. It's a last chance to be a decent father," she reminded, her voice a calm thunder that echoed in his chest. The children peeked out from behind Emery, curious, unsure. Logan's heart collapsed at the sight of his daughter clutching Emery's hand like he was her only anchor, while the boys mirrored his own young face with innocence he had abandoned years ago. "Hi, I'm Logan," he said softly. But even the name felt foreign to him now, like a stranger wearing his old skin. One of the boys tilted his head. "Mommy said you're the man from her sad days." The sentence hit him like a blade, and though he smiled, his soul wept. Emery placed a hand on Logan's shoulder, not as a friend, but as a man defending the fortress Logan once burned. "You may talk, but don't expect to erase what you never bothered to learn," he warned. Logan nodded, swallowing shame thicker than air. He spent the afternoon in their garden, watching the children play, answering their careful questions, aching every time they referred to Emery as Dad. Zariah observed from the balcony, unreadable. Her heart, once shattered by his betrayal, was now steel-wrapped in grace. Logan tried to joke with the kids, telling them how he used to climb trees, but when one of the boys asked, "Then why didn't you climb back to Mommy when she cried?" he nearly broke. He wanted to explain, to pour out the mess inside him. But what words could ever carry the weight of years lost? That evening, Zariah walked him to the gate. "This isn't about you, Logan. It never was. Don't come here hoping to be healed. Come if you're ready to protect what you left unguarded." He nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with unspoken regret. Days turned to weeks, and Logan kept coming. Not for her, but for them. He brought books, attended school plays, sat in the shadows of their lives, hoping to earn even a corner of their trust. Emery never stood in the way, but he never stepped aside either. He was present, firm, and everything Logan hadn't been. One afternoon, the little girl, Zoelle, placed a handmade card in Logan's hand. "Thank you for coming," it read in crayon, and beneath it, "Mommy doesn't cry anymore." It was both a comfort and a curse. Logan realized then that his redemption didn't live in Zariah's forgiveness. It lived in his actions, in the spaces he chose to fill with consistency, not apologies. One rainy evening, Zariah sat beside him on the porch while the kids played inside. "They're strong, Logan, but strength born from absence never forgets where the wounds came from." He looked at her, the woman he once crushed, and all he saw now was a queen forged in heartbreak, rebuilt by love that asked for nothing in return. "I ruined us," he whispered. "You did," she answered, unflinching. "But I rebuilt me, and they never had to see me fall again." Her words, though sharp, weren't cruel. They were honest, final, freeing. That night, Logan drove away with his hands steady for the first time in years. He knew he'd never win her back. But maybe, just maybe, he could win back the right to be someone his children didn't have to heal from. And that was enough. Logan stood quietly behind the crowd, cloaked in shadows as the soft auditorium lights illuminated the small stage where children sang and danced with innocent joy. His heart ached as he spotted them, his children, performing in perfect harmony, their voices rising like music he had longed to. Oh, hear his entire life. His breath caught when the youngest boy, the one with dimples like his and eyes that mirrored the very soul he'd once lost, paused mid-performance and waved directly at him. That simple, unfiltered gesture cut deeper than any words ever could. Logan's throat tightened. He forced a smile, tears streaming freely down his face as 1,000 memories of what could have been flooded his mind. Birthday mornings missed, scraped knees unkissed, bedtime stories left untold. He gripped the railing in front of him like it was the only thing keeping him standing. On stage, the triplets twirled and laughed, oblivious to the storm raging in their father's chest. And then he saw her, Zariah. Dressed in a soft lavender dress, radiant and graceful, her hand entwined with Emery's, the man who had stepped in where he had failed, who had stayed when Logan walked away. She looked toward the crowd, scanning the sea of faces, and then her eyes landed on him. For a moment the world stilled. They just looked at each other. No rage, no bitterness, just the echo of what once was and the truth of what now is. Logan didn't move. He couldn't. She didn't either, but her lips curled into the faintest, kindest smile, one not laced with regret, but with release. Emery gently squeezed her hand, grounding her in the present, and Logan knew in that instant that he had become nothing more than a chapter in her past. She had outgrown his pain. She had transcended his betrayal. As the triplets bowed and the crowd erupted in applause, Logan clapped too, his hands trembling, heart splintering in silence. The room burst into joy, but he was a ghost, applauding a life he could never reclaim. He turned to leave but paused one last time, watching his daughter leap into Emery's arms, her curls bouncing as she laughed, and Logan wondered if she even knew his name. As Zariah leaned into Emery's holder, she looked once more over her shoulder, not with scorn, but serenity. That final glance broke him, and as he stepped into the quiet hallway, her voice echoed in his ears, soft and powerful, as if spoken just for him. Sometimes, losing you was the only way I could find myself. The doors behind him closed with a gentle thud, sealing the chapter forever. Logan walked out into the night, not as the man he once was, not even as a man undone, but as someone who finally understood that love is not owned, it is earned. He had lost the woman who would have stood beside him through every storm, and in her place stood a queen who no longer needed saving. That night, as the stars shimmered above and laughter echoed from the school behind him, Logan wept, not just for what he had lost, but for who she had become without him.